إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله ونبيه وصفيه وحبيبه بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح للأمة وجاهد في سبيل الله حتى أتاه اليقين وتركنا على المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك فاللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين وعلى آله الأطهار وعلى أصحابه الأخيار وعلى أتباعه الأبرار إلى يوم الدين يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما وبعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وإن خير الهدي هدي سيدنا ومولانا رسول الله وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها فكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Oftentimes in our society we hear people talking about success. They talk about people that have attained great amounts of wealth, great amounts of fame, great amount of influence. And because of the quantitative, material nature of the world around us, these people end up becoming celebrated. And they are celebrated to the point that we are meant to feel that we look up to them or we wish we could be like them. And then we want to know everything about them, about how they arrived at that success, how they arrived at that wealth, how they arrived at that influence, etc. So people will talk about their routines or how they sleep or how they wake up or how they exercise or how they've invested, whatever. They try to break it down into those variables or those actions that if you adopted them, you will end up with that same result. Now that, what I just described, actually that's how humanity has always been. Humanity has always looked at whoever is seen at that time as a leading figure, a successful figure, and to see what are those clues that lead to success. So that in and of itself is natural. Maybe it's not natural that we idolize people that are, influential on TikTok. I mean, I still don't get that, but the idea is that people will look up to those people who have quote unquote made it. Now the interesting thing about that topic when it comes to Islam is that the Prophet ﷺ gave us a very important clue to success. Now of course the success that the Prophet ﷺ is talking about is a different type of success. But he said, إِنَّ فِي أَيَامِ أَلَا إِنَّ فِي أَيَامِ دَهْرِكُمْ لَنَفَحَاتٍ. The Prophet ﷺ said, indeed in your days and nights are windows of opportunities, nafahat. أَلَا فَتَعَرَّضُ لَهُ. So be prepared for those opportunities. So the Prophet ﷺ's way of advising us was to prepare. I'll get to the windows of opportunity in a moment, but I want to talk a little bit about preparation. If you think about it, our devotional life teaches us to prepare. to pray, you have to have the pre-things, the preparation of the prayer. You have to have your wudu, and then you got to figure out where you're going to pray. You got to make sure the time has come in. You got to make sure that you are facing the qibla. You got to make sure that the place that you're praying on is clean, etc., etc. You have to cover yourself, the things that need to be covered, so on and so forth. But the idea is you don't just stand and pray. We can stand and make dua. But when it comes to the prayer like this, we have to make sure that we have certain prerequisites that are fulfilled before we stand to pray. So therefore the mind is always thinking about that preparation. What do I need to do to pray? And Ramadan and the fasting is the preparation, on steroids for us. Because the month, all of your body, all of your physical, the physical aspects of your being are involved in the fast. Of course, it's the act of not doing something. It's the act of withholding. But in that act of withholding, that requires restraint, requires patience. It requires you to remember why you're doing it. We don't fast on just one day or on 5 days or 10 days, or we don't get to choose what we fast from. Like, this year I'm going to fast from chocolate, or this year I'm going to fast from, chips. Or we don't get to do that. we have the same format every year, year in and year out. And if you're lucky, you get to do it another year. But that in itself, the fasting is a preparation. The goal of fasting is not just the fasting itself. The goal of the prayer is not just the prayer itself, but it is to achieve those windows of opportunities that the Prophet ﷺ talked about. Of course, you have to pray and fast. I'm not saying that you reach a point where you don't need to pray and fast. I'm not saying that. Of course, we have to do the outer work. But I'm saying that's not the only reason why we fast, is just to be hungry. The fasting, the prayer, the wudu, our conduct throughout the year is to prepare us for that window, for that moment which we can turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we ask for something and that it is accepted and that it is answered. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-du'a mukhul ibadah." That supplication, dua, asking Allah, is the crown, the head, the chief of all acts of worship. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah." The dua is worship. All of our acts of worship, when you distill them down to its core, they are a form of us asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Us pleading with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Pleading for things in this world and pleading for things in the next world. To improve our lot, to help us, to increase our wealth, to protect our family, to have mercy on our deceased, to have mercy on our parents and our children, to protect our mosque, our businesses, so on and so forth. It is the act of asking that is the kernel of all of the acts of worship. Because it acknowledges our inability. It acknowledges our lack of strength. It acknowledges our lack of wealth, our lack of power, our lack of ability when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can answer. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give. Only Allah ta'ala can bestow. Only Allah ta'ala can protect. Only Allah ta'ala can lift. Only Allah ta'ala can unite, so on and so forth. So therefore, our acts of worship have been given to us to instill in us this concept of preparation. So the goal of the fast is to get to these last 10 nights. And the goal of these last 10 nights is to achieve one pure moment. Just a moment. A moment can be less than 1 minute. Just one pure moment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the night of power. So think about the whole year. You're anticipating Ramadan. The Sahaba, they used to ask Allah ta'ala for 6 months after Ramadan. They would focus their dua that their fasting be accepted. And then when there are 6 months left to Ramadan, they would ask Allah ta'ala that they arrive at Ramadan. Their whole year was regulated by this month. And then there are those that fast outside of Ramadan, of course. in Rajab and Sha'ban to prepare for the month of Ramadan. All of this to get to this one moment, which we are about to enter, these final 10 nights. But the quality of your dua, it's not about you had like a cinematic moment on the night of power, or any night for that matter. But it is that you are prepared, as the Prophet ﷺ said. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, regarding dua, he mentions a man who's traveling. And the traveling person, when you travel, when you are in the state of travel, it is one of the moments in which your dua is accepted, because you are in a position of weakness. You are away from your family, from your home, from your things. And then if you are blessed with flight cancellation and delays, you really know how much it sucks. And you're stuck in an airport somewhere for hours and hours and hours. Then you maybe when you travel and it's smooth, you don't understand this. But when you're stuck somewhere, you understand that you're in a weak position, very weak position, especially when there's no one to talk to. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned someone who was traveling. He mentioned somebody who was disheveled, so they looked like they were traveling. They were sweaty, they were messed up. They had put in the signs of traveling are on them. And then the person extends his hands like this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is one of the ways that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, Ya Rabb, Ya Rabb. He's pleading with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the beginning of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is giving you an image of a person whose dua is supposed to be answered. They're in a position of weakness, they're away from their family, they're extending their hands, they're calling on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with one of His intimate names, Ya Rabb, Ya Rabb. But the Prophet ﷺ says, وَلَكِنْ مَطْعَمَهُ حَرَامٌ. But he eats from the haram. وَمَشْرَبَهُ حَرَامٌ. He drinks from the haram. وَمَلْبَسَهُ مِنَ الْحَرَامِ. His clothes are from the haram. وَغُذِّيَ بِالْحَرَامِ. He is nourished by the haram. فَأَنَّ يُسْتَجَابَ لَهُ. How is it that Allah Ta'ala will answer that person? Because the person was not prepared for that moment. You can't just turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you need Him and when you want Him. For indeed we need Him and we want Him, or we need Him at least all the time. But we can't only turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we think that we need to gain something materially, but rather we have to be prepared all the time that our life is geared towards that dua being answered. We have to put in the effort that our dua is going to be answered. We have to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala humbly all the time. Not that we don't pray throughout the year and don't do anything good throughout the year, and we just come through the last 10 days and be, okay, I'm going to park myself in the mosque for these 10 days and that's it. I mean, inshallah, you get something from that. We don't want to deny Allah Ta'ala's mercy, of course, but that's not the ideal. What if you don't make it to the next Ramadan? That's the idea. You don't know when this might be the last Jummah, this might be the last Ramadan. I say this every Ramadan, and then throughout the year I see, subhanAllah, how many people we bury, how many people we wash, how many people we kiss goodbye to that didn't make it to the next Ramadan. 1 year it will be your last Ramadan. 1 year it will be my last Ramadan. But we don't know when that last Ramadan is. So therefore the idea is to be prepared. And by being prepared, it's not like in the way I began, it's not by, you got to go to the gym and be like an ultra athlete and, eat refined protein. I'm not talking about that. That's all material. If you want to do that, that's fine. But that's not what we're talking about. Here, by prepared, I mean you need to pray your 5 prayers on time, day in and day out. If you have some excess wealth, you need to make sure that you're paying your zakah once a year. We have boxes outside. You just drop the zakah in that. We'll take care of the rest. You have to make sure that you're fasting the month of Ramadan. You have to make sure that you're not consuming haram things throughout the year. You're like, I met a old acquaintance of mine recently. She's Muslim, and she, in the middle of talking, she said something about her college years, and but we don't drink in Ramadan. We have an alcohol fast. I'm like, yeah. I said, okay, we fast all the time from alcohol. So we have a permanent fast from alcohol. It's a permanent ban. Permanent ban on. It's not just in Ramadan, but we start saying things like this, right? Because you're in polite company, and I regret that I didn't say something. Maybe because I was fasting, I was tired, but we let these things slide because you're in polite company and you don't want to sound like you're the downer. But what happens if that's not corrected? If somebody like me doesn't say something, then maybe the gathering will be like, I guess that's okay because Tarek didn't say, it didn't say something. No, we have to have amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy an munkar. No, you can't. There's no such thing as an alcohol fast in Ramadan. Ramadan's fast is the Ramadan fast. It's the fast of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we have the permanent fast, okay, which is the permanent fast from the things that are haram. We're not allowed to consume those things. Unless you're in the desert somewhere and you're about to die and I don't know, you just find a bottle of Chardonnay or something like that. Why would there be a bottle of, they always say that in the books of fiqh, and I always have said, why is that going to happen though? Why, there's nothing in the desert except this bottle of alcohol. Anyway, but the ulama, they like to give you theories. I mean, if you're in that situation, okay, you crack it open, bismillah, to save your life. But short of that, which I'm almost certain none of you will ever experience, inshallah, there's a permanent ban on alcohol. But the point is of the story that the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, with this man, he's engaged all the time in acts of the haram. Maybe there's something dubious about his money, maybe he steals money, maybe he takes money that's not his. And then what happens with that money that you take? You are going to consume it. You're going to wear it, you're going to eat it, you're going to drink it, you're going to feed your and clothe your children with it. So your money has to be halal. The food that you eat has to be halal. Because that is what you are bringing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you call on Him and you say, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. You have to be prepared for those moments of opportunities. Now the thing about dua is, one of the powers of the dua is that when your dua is accepted and answered, it increases your faith. There's nothing more powerful than you asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for something, pleading with Allah ta'ala for something, and then seeing it happen in front of you. When that happens, you believe. And that's why the people before us believed strongly, because they saw the effects of the dua. The companions were with the Prophet ﷺ, and he would make dua and victory happen. As I said last night, the good guys won at the end of the day. Mecca was conquered. Paganism was eradicated from the peninsula. We don't even know the names of these people and these idols anymore. Very few people know them, at least. But the Prophet ﷺ made this promise when they were in the weakest state, in Mecca, at the most vulnerable state, in the very beginning of Islam. And for the Sahaba to see that happen, like, whoa, wow, this really works. So when you make dua and Allah Ta'ala answers it, it's not the dua was answered. That's nice. Don't get me wrong, because we need things. I understand. But what's even more nice, what's even more wondrous, what's even more fantastic, is knowing that you asked your Creator for something and He answered your dua. That you were worthy of that dua being answered. That you were prepared. That you put in the work. You put in the time. You put in the patience. And then your relationship with Allah Ta'ala increases. So these are the nights of dua. This is the time where you need to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To turn to Allah Ta'ala with the same set of du'as every night, from now until the last night. Hoping that inshaAllah one of those nights for sure will be Laylatul Qadr. And that inshaAllah your dua will be answered. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ad'u Allah wa antum muqinuna bil ijaba. Make dua and you are certain that Allah Ta'ala will answer you. Don't go half-half. Don't be like, I know it's never going to happen, but Allah doesn't want that. You have to go all in. Know for certain that He will answer your dua. But what happens if the dua doesn't happen? Is not answered? That's a different set of variables. Remember, I always quote from you, I think it's Mike Tyson, who said, sometimes God wrecks your plans because your plans were going to wreck you. So you want something, I want this job, I want this sister to say yes, or her family to say yes, maybe more accurately. No, I want this promotion, or I want this acceptance, I want to get into this program, this degree. I want that. And on paper it looks good. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, and it doesn't happen. Well, maybe there was no good in that for me at the end of it. I don't know where the good is going to be. But never doubt that Allah Ta'ala has not heard your dua, has not heard your pleading, because your pleading with Him is a form of worship. It is to acknowledge that He is Allah, that He is the Creator and you are the created, that He is the powerful and you are the zero. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There's no power or ability with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Recently I heard one of these, memes, one of these, crazy rabbi figures, promoting what's happened to genocide and things like that, and saying something along the lines that, we are the Jewish people, we are the people that wrestled with God, we're more powerful than God. I mean, the ridiculousness, the rational, the illogical nature of that statement. Well, how can you believe in God and then say that you are more powerful than God? Then it's not God, something else. It's your imagination of God. Because Israel, Jacob, Israel is Yaqub alayhi salam. There's a passage that Jacob wrestled with God. What's your name in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible? But that's not what the passage means, even according to Jewish traditions. But how can you come to God with that attitude that you're more powerful than Allah? Then don't call on Him. Then you answer your dua for yourself. If you think that you're more powerful than God, you rely on yourself. Would you rather rely on yourself, or would you rather rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The one who says, kun fayakun. The one who we see His wonder and His splendor and His creation and His mercy and His love throughout creation. Are we going to rely on Him, or are we going to rely on the humans that are destroying the world for greed? The people that are justifying the blowing up of children for no reason. Now there's no reason anymore. There's just no reason. We're beyond reason and logic. We're just doing it because we're just going to do it. We want to rely on them to create a just world, or we're going to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the world and the world's Rabbul Alameen, plural. I'm happy relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you make dua, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has heard you. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the ability to make dua in the first place. And this is one of the cornerstones of the Sunni creed. Our belief as Sunni Muslims is that we acquire the ability to do things from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we have no independent power and ability except that which Allah ta'ala gives us. I'm not standing here and doing this on speaking on my own. But I have acquired, kasab, I have acquired the ability to do this from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means that if I want to do something and Allah ta'ala has not decreed that I do that thing, it will not happen no matter what I do. Just like when the Prophet ﷺ said, if all of the people gathered to benefit you with something, all of humanity got together and said, we're going to give you something. And Allah ta'ala did not write for them to give you that, they will not be able to give it to you. And if all of the people of the world gather around you to harm you, to destroy you, to steal from you, to kill you, they will not be able to do that if Allah Ta'ala has not allowed it to happen. The pens are raised and the sheets are dried. Right? That's what the Prophet ﷺ taught us. So this is the time where we need to remember what that means. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge. We're going to come to Him inshaAllah with as much preparation as we come. We know that when we make dua, that in itself is a blessing. Because Allah gave us the ability to make that dua. I mean, you could have slept through Fajr. Or you could have gotten sick from the biryani last night and you're out of Taraweeh the next 3 nights. And you're at home Netflixing and not fasting because you're sick and stomach bug. It's not your fault. But one of those nights was Laylatul Qadr, right? Can't that happen? I walked into my family gathering the other day and everyone was sniffling. I left. I said, bye, I'm leaving. They're like, no. I said, I'm with 300 people every night and then the imam that leads the prayers next to me. If I get sick and he gets sick and then everyone gets sick, then there goes the whole Ramadan. I can't afford. I can't afford to get sick. You can get sick in Ramadan. It happens. So don't think that you asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a small thing. Know that the minute you have asked Him, He has answered your dua. The minute you have asked for forgiveness, He has forgiven you. Because had He not wanted to forgive you, He would have not allowed you to utter those words, Ya Allah, forgive me. When you ask Allah Ta'ala to accept your fasting, know that your fasting has been accepted. Because had He not accepted your fasting, He would have not allowed you to utter those words. The fact that you are here, that you are present, that you're breaking your fast and you make the dua before the Fajr, Suhoor, you're making the dua, that is a sign that Allah Ta'ala is pleased with you. That is a sign that you have prepared, that you are amongst those who are prepared. So never give up hope. Turn to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala with everything that you have. These are the nights and the days of dua. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So, all of you know that, as I said, these are the last 10 nights of Ramadan, and as you know that next Friday, not today, but next Friday is the night of the 27th. It's usually the night in which we traditionally complete the recitation of the Quran, and we do the dua of the khatm of the Quran, because most of the hadith that talk about Laylatul Qadr talk about it being on the night of the 27th, and that salamun hiya hatta matla al-fajr. Hiya is the 27th word in that surah. Yani this is from the ijtihad point of view. We don't know, and the reason we don't know is that we come prepared, right? If we all knew that this one night, like the night of the 23rd was Laylatul Qadr, what would happen? We would do nothing all year long except come to the mosque on the night of the 23rd. But because we don't know when it is, we come to the mosque, alhamdulillah, every night from the beginning of Ramadan to the end of Ramadan. So we invite all of you and your families to come, inshallah, on next Friday for that joyous occasion. And also it's the night in which we will update you about the project, the new building, and we will have our annual fundraiser, inshallah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our fasting and our prayers and our dua in this blessed month of Ramadan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on our parents, to have mercy on our children, to have forgiveness on those who passed before us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our mosque, to bless our homes, our businesses, and our schools. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lift us and lift those around us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for peace, brotherhood, sisterhood, fraternity. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people of the Quran and to make us people of the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. فَاللَّهُمَّ اهْدِنَا فِي مَنْ هَدَيْتَ وَعَافِنَا فِي مَنْ عَافَيْتَ وَتَوَلَّنَا فِي مَنْ تَوَلَّيْتَ وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت. اللهم تقبل صلاتنا وصيامنا وقيامنا وركوعنا وسجودنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم تب علينا توبة نصوحا تطهرنا بها جسما وقلبا وروحا، وانقلنا من دائرة سخطك إلى دائرة رضاك، وافتح علينا فتوح العارفين بك، واحشرنا تحت لواء نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يوم القيامة. اللهم اسقنا من يده الشريفة شربة ماء لا نظمأ بعدها أبدا، ثم أدخلنا الجنة بغير حساب ولا سابقة عقاب ولا عتاب، ومتعنا بالنظر إلى وجهك الكريم في جنات الخلد يا رحيم. فاللهم ارحم حينا وميتنا وحاضرنا وغائبنا، وارفع أيدي الأمم عنا، وأقمنا بالحق وأقم الحق بنا. آمين آمين آمين. والحمد لله رب العالمين. وصل اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا